everybody. Welcome to the Straight Out of BS podcast. Thank you guys so much for your continued support. Thank you to anybody that's supported the podcast so far. Please make sure you're liking the videos, subscribing if you're not already, commenting and sharing the videos. I want to thank my Patreon members, anybody that's donated financially to me. So thank you guys for that. It's never expected, so it's always appreciated. I want to do a moment of silence for the person still struggling with intrusive thoughts or addiction or anything like that. So on the count of 3, I'm going to do a moment of silence. 1, 2, 3. Okay, thank you for that. Without further ado, I want to go ahead and introduce my guest for the day. Go ahead and introduce yourself and where you went and what years.
Hi. So my name is Susie. My former name that's on my book is Susie T.T.I. I've taken my maiden name back, so I'm Susan White now. But people call me Susie. I was in Straight Incorporated between August 10th, 1982 to July 20th, 1983. And I live in Georgia.
Okay, and walk us through your childhood and what led up to you being sent away.
So I guess it would be best to explain what was different about me as opposed to most other people, not everyone, but most other people, and then what was the same. And I'll start with what was the same. I was just 16 years old, and it's been about 40 something years ago. But I was 16 years old, and I was a teenager transitioning into adulthood. And I think that is pretty common for everyone who's being sent away to these places. We're just trying to get into adulthood. We're trying to transition from one era as a teenager and into young adulthood. How I was different is I'd never done any drugs, never tried anything, never drank anything. Sorry, I have a son upstairs. And hold on just a moment. I'm sorry. So, sorry, I take care of an adult disabled son, so I apologize if he interrupts. But that was the way that I was different, was that I hadn't done any drugs. And my mother kept insisting that I was doing drugs and wanted me to go take a drug test. Well, that told me. I had been wanting to date prior to 16 and had been told by both my parents that I could date when I was 16. And then when I got to be 16, they didn't want me to date. And that just wasn't doing it for me. I was going to be like every other normal teenager. And so I would go out. I had a boyfriend that I had met at church, and he would pick me up. I'd let them know where I was going, when I would be back. And I wasn't staying gone like, all night or over the weekend, or I wasn't doing anything unreasonable, and I wasn't doing anything wrong. I guess my mother thought, since I was being defiant and doing my own thing, that that I must be on drugs. At least that was her excuse. Fast forward 40 years, I think my parents were having trouble. I was the youngest kid at home, and I think that they were headed for a divorce and they needed somewhere to put me. And that seems to be pretty typical of a lot of kids that were in straight, at least that program.
Okay. And walk us through how you got there. Were you transported? How did you get there?
Okay, so how I got there, sorry, my son interrupted me. He's still standing right in front of me. So, but how I got there, as I said, my mother had been persistent that I was doing drugs and wanted me to do a drug test. And I finally said, you know what, if it'll shut you up, I'll go take a drug test, because I had nothing to hide. I wasn't doing any drugs. I hadn't been drinking. I wasn't skipping school. I wasn't doing anything that typical normal teenagers do. I'm not saying anything's wrong with that. I'm just saying I wasn't even the normal typical teenager doing things that teenagers should be doing. Not
Yeah.
saying they should be doing drugs, but you know what I mean? Like, experimenting with things, or just, growing into an adult. I was very sheltered. So she came, I was over at my grandmother's with my boyfriend. We had just come back from a farm visit, and my mother comes over there, and she starts having a what I call a hissy fit. I said, fine, I'll go with you. And I told her I was riding with my boyfriend. She said, no, grabbed my arm, put me in the car. And we arrived at 2221 Austell Road, Marietta, Georgia. It was an old abandoned A&P building. From the outside, it looked like a cheap clinic, maybe like something you go to for a cheap pregnancy clinic, or it looked like a hole in the wall clinic. And my mother always did things. I was raised in a middle class family, but my mother always did things on the cheap. And I just figured I was going for a pee test or something. I didn't know. A piss test, a blood test. I didn't care. I was just ready to shut her up and then prove that I was right and she was wrong. So basically that's how I got there. And when I got there were other people sitting in what appeared to be a waiting room. There were chairs, just like you would see at a doctor's office. And I sat down and waited. And then someone comes to the door, a young person, and calls my name. I mean, she looked like maybe she was 18 to 20. Come to find out, I think she was about 17. As she calls my name, I go back, and that was the last time that I saw a lot of things, like daylight, food, sleep, a lot of things.
Okay. And what do you remember about when you first got there?
So they took me into this 8x8 intake room. It was windowless. It's more like an oversized closet, like a walk-in closet with no windows. Is kind of about the size that it was. There were 2 chairs in there, and I sat down. I looked around. There was no like sink, countertops. There was nothing. I kind of was starting to wonder where I was. And I got up to walk toward the door. And when I did, a girl came in, and she sat down, and she was 14, and, sat down knee to knee with me and started talking, and said, what drugs have you done? She told me her name was Vanessa. And she started talking about drugs she's done and asked what drugs I've done. And I'm like, I haven't done any drugs. And I said, my mother brought me here to get drug tested. And she laughed at me, and she said, we don't do drug tests here. And then she proceeded to tell me I was at Straight Incorporated. I got up, tried to go to the door. More girls came in. I was restrained. I was held in that intake room for, that was the morning. So it was into the night. It was nighttime. I only know that because at the time that I was brought into like the big open meeting room, it was shortly thereafter that we were sent to host homes. And it was dark outside. So I had no way of knowing. They took all my jewelry. I never got it back. They took my watch. They took my purse. And that's basically how I got into the program. They told me that I would be court ordered. I'm 16. At the time, I didn't know any different. I knew a little bit because I was jointly enrolled to be to go to college for my senior year, and I had already taken American Federal Government, so I knew some of the stuff they were saying was wrong. But they threatened me, said I'd be court ordered, I'd never get out if I didn't sign the papers. So I had initially signed my name and my boyfriend's last name because I knew that wasn't legal. They showed that to my father because my father had arrived, and he had signed the papers. My mother had already signed, and they said, well, it's too late. Your parents have already signed. They told me the program was designed for 6 months, and if they found out that I wasn't doing any drugs, that they'd let me go. And of course, that turned out to be a lie.
Okay, and how long were you there total?
11 months.
Okay, and how was your program overall? Was it easy for you to get used to like the rules? Was it hard? Did you get picked on? How was your program overall?
Well, I got bullied a lot because I didn't have any stories to tell, and I was incredibly honest. I didn't know that a lot of people were making things up. I didn't know that for like 30 years. But I didn't have anything to talk about. I didn't have any drug use to talk about. I didn't have any alcohol use to talk about. I didn't have, any skipping school to talk about. I didn't have anything to talk about. And they stood me up. They confronted me. They sat on me on the side of group. There was about 400 people in the program, girls and guys. Girls sat on one side, guys sat on the other. And they took food away from me. For most of those 11 months, I ate peanut butter out of a plastic baggie and had about 2 to 4 ounces of water a day. I got very sick. I lost down to about like 85 pounds, maybe 80. I felt like I was dying, and I had already made my peace with God that I was going to die. I didn't think I would ever get out.
Okay. And what was the hardest part about you being there, and how did you deal with it?
Not seeing sunlight. We arrived at the building. We were sent home to, the newcomers were sent home to old comers' homes. Those were people who had been in the program longer and were on a higher phase, 2nd through 5th phase. Sorry. At the first home that I went to, which I've been to that home twice, they had, they called them foster fathers, but they were host fathers. They weren't in any foster system, had no background checks, but it was the Carter's home. His name was Brian Carter. And he told his 2 girls, Kim and Liz, to go, take care of the other newcomers. And he took my clothes from me and made me sleep on a basement floor in the middle of winter. He was like I think that was the second time I've been to their home. I'm not really sure. I'm not really clear on which time it was. I think it was the second time though, because I went in August and that was still summer, and I had gone to a couple of homes. I've been to their home, and I've been to that girl Vanessa's home, and then I had come back to their home, to the Carter's home. And I was on my period. I was menstruating. He took all my clothes. I was naked. He ended up giving me a sheet to cover up with, but I had to parade before him and ask for my clothes back piece by piece. He threatened me and told me he'd been in the military and he put me in a fetal position and I would stay there all night long. I don't know if it was a contraption or something. I don't know. He just threatened me. So it was very hard. I was made to stay awake. And people would take turns. If you think people can't make you stay awake, they can. But the old comers, sometimes there'd be like 2 or 3 old comers at a house. Like out of town people, they'd have to stay with another old comer. And they would take turns staying awake and keeping me awake. And if they saw me sit down, I'd be standing in a corner. They saw me sit down or try to fall asleep, they would literally lift me up. And at one home, I remember it was Nancy Ellman, and her mother grabbed me by the ponytail and lifted me up off the ground and ripped the hair out of my head. And I just basically felt that I was abandoned by my parents. I felt that my parents didn't love me anymore. And I just had resorted to, I was never getting out of there. I mean, I really knew in my heart that I was going to die in Straight Incorporated. And I
Okay.
almost did.
Did you hear about, witness, or experience any grooming or sexual abuse when you were there?
Just I call it sexual abuse, what that man, Mr. Carter, Brian Carter, did to me. I didn't witness other people getting sexually abused. However, some of them would stand up and try to talk about it. And they would call them liars. They would call them whores. They would call them sluts. And they're talking about these host homes. I remember one girl standing up talking about, well, there were several, but I remember one specifically because I went to their home, standing up talking about how her dad molested her. And whenever you heard that in group, because they did a roll call, they frequently switched you between homes, and they do a roll call at the end of the night, and you'd know whose home you were going to or if you had changed homes. And I remember everybody just praying, you don't go to one of those homes where the father had molested the daughters, because you knew that they were telling the truth. You could tell. I honestly couldn't tell that anybody was lying. A lot of people said they lied, and I think a lot of people say that a lot of the stuff that they made up, like after the fact, decades later, because maybe they're embarrassed. I don't know. Maybe they did lie. I'm not really sure, but I did witness physical abuse. It wasn't just me, but other people. I saw people, I sat next to people who carved in their arms. And these were people that were younger than me, maybe 11, 12 years old. And I saw one girl literally pull a vein out of her arm. I was just horrified. Blood was everywhere. And this girl was not getting medical help. At one point, I witnessed them pour salt in her wounds and tape them up with duct tape on her arms. And now I'm a licensed nurse, and the things that I saw, it was just horrific. I think that everybody running those places, all the parents that participated in the abuse, I think they should all be in prison. I don't think there should be any time limit on it. I think Dave Tilley, the one who was running that program at the time, I think that he should be in prison. I don't care how old he is. I don't care what kind of health problems he has. I just think those people need to pay, because none of the kids got the help that they needed. And there were some people there that really needed help. Like they needed help before they got there, and they weren't getting the help that they needed. And if they didn't need help before they got there, they sure as hell needed help while they were there. And everyone needed help after they left there, including myself.
Okay. What was the worst thing you saw or heard about while you were there? And you can list more than one thing.
The worst thing? Well, obviously, the things that happened to me were some of the worst and most heinous crimes I had ever seen. I had even developed a goiter on the side of my neck. And I mean, it was literally, it looked like a softball from my thyroid. Nobody got medical care there. Seeing people getting beaten, they would get like 4 or 5 big guys. We're talking 200-pound guys from the guy's side, to come sit on a girl, a small girl, or they'd put you, they did it to me one time. They put me on the guy's side, and we did this thing called motivating where we had to do this with our arms. And if you didn't do it, there were people on either side of you that made you do it. You got punched in the back. There was just everything that was there was the most horrible thing I've ever seen in my life. I mean, I can't put my finger on any one particular thing, but to take away, we weren't allowed to talk to each other unless you were called upon. You could stand up, you could talk to the group. The girls weren't allowed to look at the guys' side. The guys weren't allowed to look at the girls. You had no interactions with people whatsoever. You couldn't write or receive mail. You couldn't send letters. You couldn't receive letters. I didn't see my siblings. I didn't see my aunt. I didn't see my grandmother. I didn't get adequate sleep. Sometimes I got no sleep. A lot of times I got no sleep, and other people too. There were some people that weren't allowed to, they were on bathroom duty. And I know one girl stayed in there for months, Connie, and they had forgotten about her. Like when they passed these little small styrofoam cups around that were full of ice and then had like about 2 ounces of water in it. And they would forget to give her one in the bathroom. Of course, there was somebody there, an old comer in there watching her, and they caught her drinking water out of the toilet, and they brought her out and they confronted her. And I mean, she looked green. Her skin was greenish just from, no sunlight, being deprived of food and deprived of water. Just things that are basic needs for anybody, for children. You just didn't have them. You couldn't pick up the phone and call anybody. You were led around by the belt loop, the center of gravity. And if they thought you were going to be a runner, they'd have 2 people hold the back of your pants and belt loop. And if you think it's easy to get away, it's not. There were some people that ran, but usually those were the old comers, the ones holding the newcomers. And they'd take off and just leave the newcomer standing there. I wasn't that lucky.
Okay. And did anybody try and run when you were there? Or what was their policy on runners? What would happen if you tried to run?
Lots of people tried to run. They would have, usually the doors were closed. Sometimes on a fall night, they would open the doors, but they had, even if they were open or closed, they would have stacks of chairs, like lunchroom chairs, blocking the way. And then they would have several old comers or higher phasers standing in front of those. So, I mean, unless you were Spider-Man, you'd have to break through them, run up the chairs, jump over. You just couldn't get out. But most of the time the doors were closed. I did see people run. They were tackled. They were beaten. They were set upon, face planted into the floor. They had, like 5-point restraints. They'd have their arms out to the sides. Somebody would be sitting on each arm. Somebody would be sitting on their back. Somebody would be forcing their head to the ground. Somebody would be sitting on the back of their knees, the back of their ankles. I mean, it was horrific. Sometimes they were taken into one of those small closet intake rooms. And they were beaten in there. You could hear them. So it wasn't just something that we were assuming. You could hear what was going on. But you learned real quick, don't run. And I wasn't a very strong person, wasn't very, still not athletically inclined. So I knew if I tried to run, there's no way that I would be able to get away. But I did see numerous people, and one guy, oh my gosh, his name was Jeff Gerard. I'll never forget. He came from a psychiatric institute. I mean, there were people from all walks of life. There were kids that didn't do drugs. There were kids that experimented with drugs. There were people there that were court ordered. Maybe they had murdered somebody or they had a DUI. There were people that came from mental institutions. Quite a few of them came from there. But this guy came from a mental institution, and he would, they call on him a lot, and he would stand up and he'd just start talking crazy stuff, and you didn't know, like, if he was doing it on purpose or there was really something, like, something mentally wrong with him, that he needed care, not from children. He needed care from medical people. And he would always take off running toward the door. I mean, we all knew he was going to be tackled, but he'd try it almost on a daily basis. I tried running for a door once, and I got tackled. There was no way out. And you finally just come to understand there is no way out. But because I had nothing to talk about, I was never going to graduate the program.
Okay. And what was your experience of the food there? Was it horrible? Was it bearable? Was some of it good? Was it all bad?
Well, most of the time I got peanut butter. Not all of the 11 months, but most of them. They had, on Sundays, for a very short period, maybe 3 or 4 times, 3 or 4 Sundays out of the 11 months, our parents had paid to get, there was a restaurant called Po Folks. I don't know if they're still in existence. It was like chicken biscuits, coleslaw, that they would have catered in there. And that was just on Sunday. And I got it, I don't know, maybe 3 times. What stopped me from getting that, and that was kind of snowballed back into the peanut butter diet, was I don't eat coleslaw. And the girl sitting next to me raised her hand, frantically, oh, oh, oh. And because you had to talk while you were eating. And she's not eating her coleslaw. So they took the food away from me, and I never got that again. And various times I think I just got forgotten about on a peanut butter diet. Most people got peanut butter sandwiches, but I didn't. There was only one time that I got a peanut butter sandwich, and I had gone to Day Parker's home, and she knows. I've talked to her since the program, but her father was an attorney, Sydney Parker, and she said, Dad, she can't, because on Wednesday nights, we would not eat at the building. We would eat at the host home. And it was the only night they didn't eat at the building. And I don't know where they got their food from. Some people said it was catered in. It didn't look good. It didn't look edible. It kind of looked like institutional food, but not like it was worse than school lunch type food. Maybe slop is more like what I would call it. But on that Wednesday, I had gone home with Day Parker, and they were having a meal, and I was like, oh my God, I'm going to have a meal. And it was early on in the program. And she said, Dad, she can't have anything to eat. And she can only have peanut butter, like just peanut butter on a plate, like with a spoon. And I remember him taking her aside. I can still see it, them talking over at the doorway. And I ended up getting a peanut butter sandwich that night. He said he couldn't withhold food from me because he knew it was illegal. These parents knew what they were doing was illegal. And the people running the program knew what they were doing was illegal. And they still continued to do it. They still got away with it. Yeah. But the food, for the most part, like the parents would feed you breakfast if you were not on a peanut butter diet. I got peanut butter for breakfast. And if the parent didn't have any peanut butter, I got nothing for breakfast. I got nothing for lunch because they would send the lunch in a paper bag. If they did have peanut butter, I would get peanut butter in a baggie to eat with my finger for lunch. And that's it. Most of the other people, depending on what kind of home you were at, some people had, a club sandwich, and other people would have peanut butter and jelly sandwich. It just depends on which home you went to. If it was a middle class home, a poorer home, like the low end of the middle class or the upper end of the middle class, it just depended on what the parents sent. But most of the time that I was in the program, I don't remember eating anything but peanut butter.
Okay. And did you graduate from the program or did you get pulled?
I did not. I had, by the grace of God, I made it to third phase. I don't know how. I made it to second phase, and second phase is only that's when you go home, is only supposed to be for 2 weeks. You're supposed to have a little bit more privileges, but I had a foster, they called him foster sister, but she was an out-of-towner, Dawn Weatherby, who had been living at my home for the previous year, while I was on first phase, I say year, but for the most of the 11 months. And so I wasn't alone. She wore the key. They were deadbolts on the windows that nobody had the key to. There was a deadbolt, and she wore that key in her underwear. I never had an opportunity to have that key and be out by myself, even though I should have, because they knew that I wasn't supposed to be there. And they knew they were doing wrong. My parents knew they were doing wrong, and they were afraid that I would leave. So I made it to second. I had gotten stood up to talk about something, and I can't remember what it was, but just sharing anything, whether it's the present, the past, the future goals, just to get called on to share in a group of 400 people was something that counted good for you. So I had asked for third phase, and third phase was supposed to be either where you went to school, back to school, or you were able to get a job. And I got sent home on third phase, and then immediately got put back to newcomer status, which is like first phase again. I don't know what it was. I think it was 2 of my newcomers had said that I had turned my back on them, which I didn't, and said they had stayed up talking to each other all night. I don't know if that happened or not. I don't know. But I was doing everything by their book. I got started over, but the mistake that they made was they sent me back to my own home on newcomer status. So I was still on third phase, but I was on newcomer status, which meant that other people held on to me by the belt loop. So it was the foster sister, or the girl, the out-of-towner that was staying at my house. She had 2 newcomers. Those 2 newcomers held my 2 newcomers that I had belt loops. And then those 2 newcomers held my belt loop. And so there was no escaping. But when I had got home, I mean, I was dying. I knew I was dying. And I knew this was my last chance to tell my dad what was going on. And my dad, I had gone, it was, I think, a Wednesday night. And Dawn Weatherby, we were fixing to have something to eat. And Dawn called my dad, Dad, she can't eat. He said, if she doesn't eat, you don't eat. He said, none of you eat. And she said, oh, Dad, I think I need to call the building. He said, I'm going to do it for you. But before he did, I tried to tell him all the abuse that I'd suffered, about having to parade in front of Mr. Carter and asking for my clothes back piece by piece and being humiliated. I told him, I mean, basically everything that was going on, that I had not been being fed, that I had been given peanut butter. And I don't know if my parents did, but a lot of people talk about how they had to pay a fee every month. From what I understand, it was just $3,500 that my mother paid at that time to put me in this place. I don't remember her saying anything about a monthly fee, but other kids said that their parents had to pay a monthly fee. I don't know if it was just for out of towners or while their kid was on first base. I don't know. Seeing as now I know that I don't think that my parents paid anything. Maybe that's why I was on peanut butter. I don't know. I mean, they said it was because I wasn't being honest, but I had told my dad, and my dad didn't believe me. And I'm like, you have to believe me. This is what's going on. And I looked at the newcomers that I had, and one of them, she's dead now, but her name was Susan Jolly. And I said, Susan, I said, you need to tell my dad what's been going on. And all of them were afraid. They were trying to get to a higher phase. They were afraid of getting punished. They were afraid of, getting started over. And when you get started over, you can't talk for 3 days. So even if you won't get called on. So and they can freeze you. They froze me on day one. So there was a period of months that it wouldn't matter if I got called on. I couldn't talk. I wasn't allowed to because I was frozen on day one. So there was a real consequence there for, these kids if they spoke up and said what was really going on, because the other old comer would go back to the building and report. They had a little observation book that they would report things and write things down. And then people would get confronted in group and they get abused. They get started over. They get privileges taken away if they had privileges. And I begged all of my newcomers. I said, you need to tell them what's going on, because I knew the old comer wasn't going to, because she was on 5th phase, which is the last phase before you graduate. So she wasn't going to screw that up. And Susan Jolly was the only person that spoke up and said, yes, everything she's saying is the truth. I don't know why my dad believed her and didn't believe me. He ended up getting on the phone. He called a junior staffer, told him he was coming back to the building. And I rode with him. And honestly, I was scared. I was scared that I was going to get dropped off too. He dropped every one of the girls off that were at our home. It was dark. It was close. And I remember my heart racing. I can still feel it racing, that he was going to dump me off too, because they had already dumped me off. They had already abandoned me. And I didn't know what was going to happen. I didn't know what to expect, but he dumped them off right there on the sidewalk, and we ended up leaving. And that was my last day. That was the last time that I had ever had to go into the building. I did go back to the building after that when I sued. I sued straight, which led to the beginning of the shutdowns of the 42 locations nationwide. And I went back. I had obtained a lawyer, Kathleen Wild, and got a second lawyer, which is currently a federal judge, Amy Totenberg. And I went back to the building and told them I wanted my file. And they said, well, can you stand outside? They wanted me to stand outside in the cold. And I was like, absolutely not. I won't stand outside. And they gave me I don't know if it's a complete copy, but they gave me a copy of the file that I had, and I ended up suing them, which led to the shutdown of Straight, but also led to the offshoot programs that are open today, like these, what they call schools or academies and wilderness programs. It's just it's like a never ending cycle that just keeps on going.
Yeah, it really is. What have you struggled with the most as a result of being in the street?
I have complex PTSD. I have anxiety. I'd say probably up until about 5 years ago. So probably for almost 40 years, because I think it's been 44 years. But for about 38, 39, something like that years, I had nightmares. I would dream that I was running from people and they were, crying, that they were trying to put me back in there. And like, there were these the only way I know to describe them is like high prison fences with barbed wire, and I couldn't get out. And I just remember having those nightmares. They were pretty frequent every night. I still sometimes when I go into stores, we had to sing these songs, kiddie songs like Zippity Doo Dah, You Are My Sunshine, things like that. But you know how music plays in the store, like you go in a drugstore or something and it's playing. There are many times that I've walked out. We used to have to sing Lean on Me, or different. These are a few of my favorite things. Songs like that. And sometimes just by odd chance, it would be one of the songs playing either in the grocery store or drugstore. I've walked out and left a buggy full of what I was getting in tears and people looking at me like, what's wrong with you? I can still see the abuse. It's like a movie reel, it just playing like it happened 5 minutes ago. I went through 14 years of therapy. And that was after 3 decades. That's when I started it. My therapist, she helped me get through a lot of it. I was just a basket case. As a result of being in straight, I didn't have a normal transition from teenager to adulthood. I don't know how to act in social situations a lot. I mean, now I do, but I kind of stay to myself. Um, I guess a lot of it is I have broken relationships with my family members. I do talk to my dad, only because he had sent me a card one time and it was a heartfelt apology. He blamed my mother. He said, oh, it still didn't make me feel good that he said, well, she said she'd divorce me if I didn't sign the papers. I mean, as a child, even if I'm an adult child, it makes me feel like I wasn't worth anything to him, that she was worth more. I don't speak to my mother. I've tried that relationship many times. She's got narcissism and some other control issues. Never apologized to me. She's 92. She will never apologize to me. And I've just had to block her out of my life. So I have broken family relationships. I was, before I got put in there, I was in modeling school at Lynn Chris Ann Modeling School. I was going to be a model and be in movies. I was also jointly enrolled at Southern Tech to be an electrical engineer. My life took a drastic turn from that. I didn't end up going to Southern Tech. When I got out, I had never failed anything. And I just missed my senior year. I missed senior prom. I missed graduation with my peers. Those are things that they may not sound big, but I can't go back and get those moments back. I can't go back and go to prom. I can't go back and walk across the stage and get my diploma. I went to an alternative school, Kenwood, which was later renamed Oakwood. I went for 9 weeks. I had gotten all of my credits except one English. So I took mass media, interior decorating, art, and I was the office aide. I went for 9 weeks, got straight A's, graduated, and I didn't look back. I didn't end up going to college afterwards, but it was a while. It was after I had had my first child, as a single mother. Relationships are hard for me, like interpersonal relationships, like with trust issues. I don't have any trust. There is none. I don't trust. My motto is trust no one. I've sought out people for relationships with guys that were abusive, because what straight taught me was abuse equals love. Because every time you'd stand up and say something, they'd say, the whole group would say, "Love you, Susan," or "Love you, whoever." And they equated abuse to love. And so I didn't know the difference, because it's like a mind control program where they strip your identity and then they build you back up from a childlike state into who you need to be. And when I got out, a friend that I had known since I was 5 said that I acted strange. I acted like a zombie. I dressed strange. I didn't know any of the clothing styles. I hadn't heard music in a year. I hadn't seen television. I hadn't been in society. I had been pulled from society. It was worse than being in jail. It was worse than being in prison. I was isolated and I didn't know how to act. And she let me know. She said, "Something's wrong." It took me a long time to realize, yeah, something is wrong. But I sought out abusive relationships. I was married for over 20 years to a very abusive man. And I got out with my life, and 4 kids later. I have 5 kids altogether. It's made it hard for me to interact with my own kids. The thing these days is, if you spank a kid, the kid says, "Oh, you're being abused." Or, if you take something away from them or you stand toe to toe with them, you're an abusive parent. And I've always said to my kids, you don't know what abuse is. You don't know. You have no idea. They don't have the concept of abuse. Not kids in this era, in this day and age. They don't have the concept. They don't know what it's like to be physically abused, emotionally abused, mentally abused, sexually abused. They don't comprehend what I went through. I do have one of my daughters that helped me write my book, Abandon. And, well, she was my sounding board. She didn't help me write it. She was my sounding board. And she would ask questions, which would lead me to rearrange something that I wrote, or, put more information in there. And I think she's the only one of my 5 children that really understands what I went through. I don't think that she's aware of how it has affected me in relationships. And I blame myself. I blame myself that I brought my kids up in a toxic environment, where there was fighting and yelling and arguing, and that I even chose to be with that person. I'm thankful for my kids, but I don't think that they understand how much I blame myself. Because ultimately I made those choices, but I didn't know why I was making those choices, if that makes any sense.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes total sense. If you could go back in a time machine, knowing what you know now and not go through straight, would you do it, and why?
Okay, say that again. If I went back in a time machine,
Knowing what you know now, would you go through straight again?
if I went back in a time machine, I wouldn't get in the car. If I could go back and tell my 16-year-old self one thing, it's don't get in the car with your mother. I was actually living, my parents had gone to Hawaii and they wanted my sister to watch me. My sister was bossy, a little bit of a bully. It's kind of bossy. I don't really want to say bully, just kind of, she didn't want to watch me and I didn't want to stay with her. And so they had told me I could go stay with my brother. And it was normal at my brother's house. And he was my eldest brother, Phil. And I didn't want to go back home. So I was essentially living at my brother's house, which is another reason I think my mother wanted to regain control of me. I didn't want to go back home. I came from a home where my mother would go into a tirade. And, I remember one Easter, my triplet nieces were over there, and my brother and their sister. And, we were supposed to be having Easter dinner. And my mother just starts screaming and throwing dishes on the ground and breaking them. It was just always, I grew up in a toxic family. I didn't grow up in a normal family. And a lot of people say, oh, well, everybody's got problems. No, I didn't grow up in a normal family. A narcissistic mother, a submissive father. And I put a lot of that in my book because people wanted to know what kind of parents do this. My dad was Catholic, my mother was Pentecostal, and I had to go to one or other of both of the churches every time the doors were open. So it really screwed up a lot of things in my head because Catholic and Pentecostal are two very different religions. There was always arguing between my mother and my father. Even though we were a middle class or upper middle class family, they didn't do drugs or anything like that, but it was just toxic. It was just not a normal upbringing. I was very sheltered. I wasn't allowed to go out anywhere. I mean, I couldn't understand why my mother thought I was on drugs because I was never allowed to do anything. I was allowed to go to church, and that's where I met my boyfriend, but I wasn't allowed to go anywhere or do anything. And when I wanted to do something that normal teenagers do at sweet 16, and they had promised me that I could do, then all of a sudden something was wrong with me. And that was the message that was given to me. And then for a year, 11 months, that was ingrained in me that something's wrong with me. It was never something was wrong with my parents or my family dynamic. It was something was wrong with me. And whether, I didn't do drugs, but there were people there that experimented, or maybe people who were doing heavy drugs. I don't know. They said people said lots of different things, but they shouldn't ingrain in somebody that something's wrong with them. Those people didn't start doing drugs because there was something wrong with them. There was something wrong with the environment they were in, and I'm a real avid plant person, and I raise orchids. My dad taught me how to raise orchids. If you put an orchid in the wrong environment, like this cold weather we're having, and you set it outside, it's going to die. If you put it in the right environment, it's going to thrive. But I think most of the kids that were in that place, just when they got out, they were a shell of a person. They weren't even a person anymore. And a lot of people have committed suicide. I'm surprised I didn't. I didn't know who I was anymore. I didn't even feel like a person. I didn't even feel like a human being. But if I could go back in time, and I wish I could, I'd say, don't get in the car. You have nothing to prove to anybody. You don't need to prove to anybody that you're not doing drugs. I never got my drug test because they would have exonerated me. And I did hear later on, after I'd been out of the program for some time, I had reconnected with a staff member, Pam Streetman, and Pam said that she had gone in and told my parents that she didn't think that I was on drugs. This is while I was in that intake room being held against my will and not allowed to leave. And she said my mother insisted that I stay in the program. And so they told me the entire time I was there, I may not have done drugs, but I had a druggy attitude. I was a teenager. I was growing up into an adult. I think I was a pretty good teenager. And it isn't until recently that, I've regained the notion that I'm a good person and I didn't deserve that. And none of those other kids deserved that. There were people in there that really seriously needed some medical help. I saw a girl, we get sandwiched into intake rooms at 6:00 in the morning until 9:00. Those 8x8 little closets, they pack 100, 200 of us in one of those, sitting knee to knee, with old comers standing at the door guarding. And this one girl who had come in, I know I'm going back, but this one girl had come in, her name was Patty, which she's deceased now. She took her life. She was on heavy drugs, and they said that she was withdrawing from heroin. She was throwing up. Nobody was getting her medical help. She was rocking back and forth. I can still see her. She was still in the program when I left and when I got pulled, and she went on to become a staff member. And she just left staff one day and killed herself, OD'd. But she needed medical help. Kids on kids is not medical help. But yeah, if I wish I could go back in time. I've often wished there was a time machine that would take me back in time, and I would say, don't get in the car. Don't prove anything to anybody. Flip your mom off, whatever, just go on.
Okay, and what do you think would have helped you instead of being sent away?
What do I think what?
Would have helped you instead of being sent away?
Family counseling, because my mom had and still has some serious issues. And she will die with those issues. I mean, like I said, my parents are older parents. They're 92 and 94. I think leaving me at my brother's and just keeping me away from that toxic environment. My brother was, trying to help me get a job. He was trying to help me get my driver's license. I didn't even have a learner's permit. I didn't get my license until I was 18. He was doing things that a normal parent should do. And he even told me, he says, the Bible says that if your parents don't raise the child correctly, then it's up to the eldest male to take over the position. And I was learning a lot through my brother. Ultimately, I ended up going there after I got out of straight, and I got a job as a bookkeeper with his girlfriend at the Atlanta Humane Society, and some different things. But I think that would have been better just to leave me at my brother's.
Okay. And is there anything else that you want people to know about your experience, or anything that you might tell a parent thinking about sending their kid to a place like this? And also, where can people buy your book?
Okay, so about parents who are thinking of sending their child away to any program, don't. You had that child, it's your responsibility to raise that child. I raised 5 on my own. Even as a married person, I was a single person. I had children with varying abilities and disabilities. I had trying teenagers. We've all been there. You should never send your child away to anyone else to let them care for them. If you think that your child has a drug problem, take them to a reputable medical facility and get them medical help. Do not relinquish your child to anyone else to raise, because ultimately there is abuse involved, and they will be abused. For my book, I did have a website, and I had it on Amazon. Amazon changed their policies. I am on Facebook. I'm on Twitter, x.com, as Seagate, Seagate. And it's at Against Programs. I am on Facebook under author. Either you can look up author Susie T.T.I, because it's facebook.com/author Susie T.T.I, and that's TENEYCK. But my page name has been changed because my name changed to author SD White, like the color white. But this is what my book looks like. It is fully referenced. It's roughly 400 or 500 pages. It talks about how Straight started, how it was a program off the mind control program, The Seed. It's got an appendix that it lists the 42 locations nationwide that have been shut down. It gives a brief description of how programs branched off of that once it closed down. Takes a little bit of look into my childhood. I was in a writers group when I wrote this. And they all wanted to know, what kind of family did you grow up in for this to happen? I grew up in a middle-class family. That was mainly who they sought pocketbooks of, those kinds of families that had some kind of money, or, they could keep milking for money to get their kids. And it talks a little bit about my life afterwards and how straight affected me, and how it was tumultuous, and it was failed relationships, one right after the other. It talks about the family dynamic. It talks about the abuse that I endured after straight. And it's pretty horrific. It doesn't go into so much detail. Most of the story is about my days in there. And basically day to day, what was going on, what I saw, what I experienced. And all the days seemed to run in together unless there was something dynamic, that happened. Somebody different getting abused or something that would stand out in my head. But basically that's what it goes through. But you can reach out to me on Facebook. There's the spelling of my name. Again, it's facebook.com/author Susie T.T.I, or you can just search for author SD White, or you can go to x.com, reach out to me. I am at Against Programs, or my profile will say Seagate. And that's about it.
Okay, and I will post all those links. Just send me all the links on Facebook or TikTok, or no, text them to me, and I'll get them in there. But thank you so much for coming on the show. If you ever want to do a part 2 follow-up, things come up, just let me know, reach out, and we'll make that happen.
I'll be happy to. And if you have any other questions, please reach out.
Okay.
There's so much that I could just talk for weeks. The main thing is, it's hard living with, I know how war veterans feel. It's hard living with complex PTSD. The PTSD from events in childhood, or even my marriage, it just all combined. And then after, it's just like it kept happening. It kept happening. Now I prefer to be alone, and I am. I'm alone, single, taking care of one of my adult sons who's disabled. And I'm happy. I just want to be alone. And I find happiness in that. But yeah, if you think of anything else or have a list of follow-up questions, I'll be glad to do a part 2. Just let me know.
Okay. Well, thanks once again for coming on the show. And if you guys have watched so far in the video, please make sure you like the video, subscribe if you're not already, comment down below. I'd love to say hello. And if you want to share your story, leave a comment down below and let me know, or send me an email to straightoutofbs@gmail.com. That will be in the intro title screen of this video. And please share the videos, so we can continue to expose these places and prevent children from being sent there and make people feel not so alone. So until we catch you on the next one, thank you guys for tuning in, and we will see you next time. Bye, y'all.
Thank you.